Every time you walk past a pharmacy, you probably don't think much about it. The lights are on, the shelves are stocked, the counter is open. You have thought about it the same way your whole life, as a place that is simply there, the way a gas station is simply there, the way water from a tap is simply there. I thought about it the same way. I spent 31 years behind that counter and I never once questioned whether it would be there tomorrow. I was a pharmacist. I knew the supply chains better than almost anyone. I had lived through 2 drug shortage events from the inside. And I still did not see it. Not until I was clinically dead on a Tuesday night in February, and I was shown the same shelving units I had arranged with my own hands, empty, in a way that communicated permanence. I was documented as having no heartbeat for 11 minutes. The resuscitation record from Blanchard Valley Hospital exists. What happened in those 11 minutes is the reason I am here. If you take a medication every day, thyroid medication, a blood pressure pill, insulin, I need you to stay with me, because what I was shown in those 11 minutes was not vague. It was specific, it had a mechanism, and it had 3 names. If testimonies like this matter to you, accounts that are specific, that are clinical, that carry real weight, subscribe to this channel, because there are more of them, and I believe you're here for a reason. And before we go any further, I want to ask you something in the comments. What medication do you take every single day that you have never once thought about running out of? I have a scar on my chest that wasn't there on Valentine's Day of 2023. The doctors made it during the 11 minutes I wasn't in there. I want you to understand what I mean by that. 11 minutes. That is not a figure of speech. That is not an approximation. That is the number documented in the resuscitation record from Findlay Fire Station 1, Blanchard Valley Hospital, Findlay, Ohio. 11 minutes of no heartbeat, no blood pressure, no brain activity that any machine in that room could detect. And I am sitting here telling you about it because something brought me back, and what it showed me before it did is the reason I have not slept a full night since February of 2023. My name is Peggy Callahan. I was a pharmacist for 31 years. I want you to hear that word the way I mean it. Not someone who counts pills, someone who knew every medication in that dispensary the way a carpenter knows their tools. I knew the supply chains. I knew the manufacturers. I knew which drugs had 1 production facility in the world and which had 12. I knew what a shortage looked like before it hit the shelves, because I had watched 2 of them build from the inside. I was not a person who believed in visions. I was a person who believed in evidence. It was a Tuesday, February 14th, 2023. Valentine's Day, which I mention only because the irony of it still catches me. I was working the closing shift at Callahan's Pharmacy, which was my late husband Dennis's family name on the sign, the pharmacy I had worked in for the last 19 years of my career. I was doing the end-of-day inventory. I had just finished counting a tray of metoprolol succinate, a beta blocker, a heart medication, the kind of medication I had dispensed to cardiac patients for 3 decades, and I remember setting the tray down and thinking that the count was off by 2 tablets and I would need to recount in the morning. That is the last ordinary thought I had. I felt something I initially read as indigestion, a pressure in my chest that I did not recognize as anything more than that because I had no history, no warning, no reason to believe that my aorta was quietly failing. I sat down in the dispensary chair, the one I had sat in 10,000 times, the one I kept meaning to replace because the armrest was cracked, and that was it. That was the end of the ordinary part of my life. What I know from the medical record is this: I went into cardiac arrest from a type A aortic dissection. My assistant Laurie Dempsey had left for the evening but returned approximately 4 minutes after I lost consciousness because she had forgotten her phone charger. She found me in the chair. She called 911 while pressing one hand to my shoulder. EMS arrived. My heart was documented as having stopped at 9:47 in the evening. Return of spontaneous circulation was documented at 9:58. 11 minutes. The cardiologist who treated me, Dr. Anand Mehta, told me when I was well enough to have the conversation that given the location and severity of the dissection, survival was not what the data would have predicted. I was not, during those 11 minutes, in the chair. I want to tell you what it was like to realize that, because it was not dramatic, it was not frightening. I was above the dispensary, not far above, maybe 8 or 10 feet. I could see the tops of the shelving units, the ones I had arranged myself when we moved into that building 19 years earlier. I could see Laurie's hands on my shoulders. I could see the side of my own face, which looked very still and very pale under the fluorescent lights. I remember noticing that I had left a sticky note on the edge of the counter that said "Recount Metro" in my own handwriting. I was not afraid. That surprised me later, when I had the ability to be surprised by anything. But in the moment, what I felt was something I can only describe as a loosening, like a coat that had been too tight for years and was finally removed. I could see everything with perfect clarity. I could see Laurie dial 911. I could see her mouth moving. I could not hear her words. What I could hear, if hear is even the right word, was a kind of resonance, not music, not a voice. The sound inside a bell after it's been struck, if that bell were the size of a room. I want to stop here for a moment before I tell you what came next, because I need you to understand that what I am about to describe is not a dream. It is not something I read in a book about near-death experiences, though I have since read several and I understand why people do. It is not the result of oxygen deprivation causing hallucinations, which I have also read about and which I considered seriously because I am a pharmacist and that is the kind of person I am. I considered every alternative, and then I accepted that what I was shown was real because the alternative required me to dismiss something specific and verifiable that I could not dismiss. That is what I came back to tell you about, and I need you to hear it because I believe it was meant for you as much as it was for me. What I saw was my pharmacy, not as it was that Tuesday night. I was shown what it will be. I was still above the room when I became aware that something had shifted. The resonance changed. The quality of the space changed. I cannot explain this in physical terms because none of the physical terms are quite right, but the closest I can get is this. It was as if the room I was looking at became transparent, and through it I could see the same room at a different time. The same shelving units, the same layout, the same dispensary counter with the same scratch on the corner that I had been meaning to report to the landlord. Empty. Not empty the way a pharmacy looks after hours, with the lights off and the gate pulled down. Empty the way a shelf looks when supply has simply stopped arriving. The medications I had spent 30 years dispensing, the beta blockers, the statins, the blood pressure medications, the thyroid medications, the insulin, gone. Not missing, not delayed. Gone in a way that communicated permanence. This was not a temporary shortage. This was not a supply chain hiccup of the kind I had navigated twice in 30 years. I understood, with the kind of understanding that does not come from thinking, that what I was seeing was a future state, a settled fact, a thing that would happen. And then I understood something else, which is the thing I have had the most difficulty saying out loud. I understood that this was not unique to my pharmacy. I was seeing one room, but the understanding attached to it was larger than the room. This was not Callahan's pharmacy in Findlay, Ohio, running out of stock. This was the system, the entire distribution network that I had trusted for 31 years. The manufacturers, the wholesalers, the regional distributors, the retail dispensaries, the whole chain. And in 2026, by what I was shown, that chain would not hold. I want you to picture what that means. Not abstractly, practically. You take a pill every morning. Maybe you have for years. Maybe you don't think about it because it has always been there, because you have always been able to call in the refill and pick it up on Tuesday. You do not think about where it comes from. You do not think about the plant in India or the plant in China that produces the active ingredient, or the facility in New Jersey that formulates it, or the regional warehouse in Cincinnati that holds 60 days of regional supply. You do not think about any of that because you have never had to. It has always just been there. I spent 31 years knowing that the chain was more fragile than people understood. The two shortage events I worked through, the 2011 injectable drug shortage and the COVID supply disruptions, both of them taught me the same lesson. The system has no slack. It runs on a margin of days, not months. When it works invisibly. When it fails fast. What I was shown was not a gradual failure, it was a cascade. I need you to hold that word. A cascade is not a flood. A cascade is what happens when a series of individually manageable failures occur in sequence, each one eliminating the buffer that would have absorbed the next. I was shown the cascade, I was shown the dominoes, and I was shown which medication categories would fall first. That is what I need to tell you about now, because this is the part I was sent back to say, not the vision of the empty shelves. Though that was real and it was specific, and I have not been able to close my eyes since without seeing it. The specific part, the 3 categories. I do not know why it was 3. I did not count them. They arrived as understanding, the way the rest of the experience arrived, whole, complete, labeled without labels. 3 categories of medication, 3 populations of people, 3 clocks that are running. The first is thyroid medication, levothyroxine specifically, which is the most prescribed medication in the United States. I want you to hear that. The most prescribed medication in the country. More people take it than take blood pressure medications, more than take cholesterol medications. The majority of them are women over 50. The majority of them do not know they are one supply disruption away from a deterioration of cognition, of cardiac function, of every system in the body that thyroid hormone regulates. They take it every morning and they think nothing of it, the same way I took my 31 years in that dispensary for granted. Levothyroxine has a narrow therapeutic window. What that means in plain terms is that even a small interruption in supply causes real, measurable, dangerous consequences. It is a generic medication, which means the profit margins are thin, which means manufacturers exit at the first viable economic reason to do so. There are not many of them. There never were. I knew this before I died. What I was shown on the other side was the moment when the math stops working for the last manufacturer standing. The second category is blood pressure medication, specifically the ARB class, losartan, valsartan, and the beta blockers. I want to tell you something about pharmaceutical manufacturing that most people don't know, because I spent 30 years working with this reality, and I almost never thought to explain it to anyone. The same production facilities that make one generic medication often make several. When a plant goes offline, for regulatory reasons, for economic reasons, for any reason, it doesn't take one drug out of the supply chain, it takes 12. The cascade I was shown about blood pressure medications was specifically about that overlap. Not one failure, a cluster. The kind that looks, from the outside, like bad luck. From the inside, from where I was standing in that experience, it looked like arithmetic. And the third is the one I have had the hardest time talking about, not because I am uncertain about it, because of what I was shown when I understood it, because when I was given the understanding of the third category, insulin, specifically long-acting insulin for type 2 diabetics, who are not on pump therapy, who are on fixed incomes, who live in rural counties, who do not have telehealth access, who are 3 or 4 missed doses from a crisis. I was also shown the faces. I do not mean that literally. I was not shown a roster of names and faces. I mean that the understanding that accompanied the third category came with a human weight that the first two did not carry in the same way. I understood, in a way I have no scientific language for, the specific population. I understood the geography. I understood the distance between where those people live and the nearest hospital. I understood what happens in the body when insulin supply is interrupted for someone who has been dependent on it for 20 years and has no backup supply and no way to obtain one quickly. I spent 31 years behind a counter dispensing medication to people in exactly that situation. I knew every one of them by name. I will not describe what I was shown about that third category in any more detail than I already have. I will simply tell you that I understand completely why a pharmacist was the person this was shown to. Because the faces I understood in that moment were not strangers. I want to stop and let that land for a moment before I tell you what happened next. Because after the 3 categories, the experience shifted again. The transparency I had been looking through, the window into that future pharmacy, closed, and I became aware of something I can only call a horizon. Not a visual horizon, though it had a quality of distance to it. The edge of what I was permitted to see. And beyond that edge, I understood there was more. More of what had been shown, more of what was coming, more of the picture of 2026 that I had been given only a portion of. I was not permitted to go further. I was given to understand, without words, that what I had already received was sufficient for what I needed to do, and then I was given the only direct communication of the entire experience. It was brief. It is the nature of important things to be brief, I was told, and I will not pretend I know the precise mechanism by which I was told, because I do not, and I will not dress it up in language I do not own, that what I had been shown was not everything that would happen, but it was everything I needed to know in order to do what I was being sent back to do. That was it. That was the complete message. And then I was shown one final image, a waiting room. I recognized it by type, not by address. Plastic chairs. A number dispenser on a post by the door, a pickup counter with a frosted glass partition, a pharmacy waiting room, the kind I had worked behind for 31 years. The room was full, every chair was occupied, there were people standing along the wall, and the counter was dark, the lights behind the partition were off, and the shelves behind the counter, the ones I could see through the partition, were empty. The people in those chairs were waiting. They were not panicking. They were waiting with the particular patience of people who believe that if they wait long enough, the counter will open, that the medication will arrive, that the system will restore itself the way it always has before. I watched that room for what felt like a long time. And then I was back. I need you to understand what that felt like. Coming back, because it is not what you might expect from someone who had been through 11 minutes of clinical death and who had just witnessed something that would change the entire shape of their life. It was not relief. It was not the joy of survival. It was the single most disorienting and in some ways most painful moment of the entire experience. Because where I had been had a quality to it, a warmth, a completeness, a sense of being fully known without having to explain yourself, that the dispensary chair did not have. Returning to the body felt like walking back into a dark room after standing in sunlight. Not dangerous, not unwelcome. But the darkness was immediately, undeniably present in a way it had never been before. I want to be honest with you about that, because the cost of knowing something like this is not nothing. I came back to a body that hurt. I came back to a cardiac ICU bed and a cardiologist telling me things about my aorta that I understood better than I wanted to. I came back to my daughter holding my hand and trying not to let me see her crying. And underneath all of that, under the recovery, under the grief of Dennis being gone, under the relief on my children's faces, underneath all of it was the waiting room. Every day since February 14th of 2023, the empty counter, the full chairs. I spent 14 months not saying this out loud. I said other things. I suggested to my most vulnerable patients that they might want to maintain a slightly larger personal supply than usual. I had conversations with my daughter about building a home pharmacy. I gave quiet warnings to the people in my professional life who I thought might hear them. I told myself that was enough, that the privacy of what I had been shown was something I was protecting. And then my granddaughter Emma, who is 9 years old, asked me why Grandma had all those extra medicine bottles in the basement. I did not have an honest answer that was also simple. And I realized in that moment that I had been protecting my silence at the cost of the people I could warn. I was a pharmacist. I understood the mechanism. I had been shown the specific information, and I was keeping it. That ends tonight. I want to stop for a moment and speak directly to you, not to everyone watching this, to you specifically, whoever you are, whatever your reason was for finding this video today. I do not believe you arrived here by accident. I believe, and this is not something I would have said before February 14th of 2023, because I was a practical woman who did not deal in beliefs of this kind. I believe that the information I was shown was given to me specifically so that it could reach the people who would act on it. And you are one of them. Here is what I'm asking you to do. One thing, just one. Before this week is over, answer this question honestly. Do you have 30 days? If you take levothyroxine or any thyroid medication, do you have 30 days of supply in your house right now? If you take a blood pressure medication, do you have 30 days? If you or someone in your household takes insulin, do you have 30 days? Not a year, not a bunker, 30 days. The margin between a supply disruption and a crisis for most people who are dependent on daily medication is not months, it is days. 3 to 5 days is the critical window for thyroid medication. For blood pressure medication, the window before serious consequences begin is slightly longer, but not by much. For insulin-dependent diabetics, the window can be shorter than that. I am not asking you to panic. I am not asking you to do anything dramatic or expensive or complicated. I am asking you to do the thing I advised my patients to do quietly, one by one. Over the 14 months I stayed silent. Talk to your doctor. Ask about a 90-day supply instead of a 30-day supply. Many insurance plans cover it. Many do not even require a new prescription, just a different dispensing schedule. Explore mail-order pharmacy options, which often come with a 3-month supply by default. Look into manufacturer patient assistance programs for insulin if cost is a barrier. Look into Good RX for generics. I am a pharmacist. I am not advising you on your specific medical situation. What I am doing is telling you what I was shown, and telling you that the single most practical response to what I was shown is to build 30 days. 30 days of the medications you cannot safely stop taking. And I want to tell you something about the people in those chairs. In the waiting room at the edge of what I was permitted to see, not all of them had to be there. That is what I understood when I was shown it. Not all of them were there because of fate or because of forces too large to resist. Some of them were there because they had 30-day supplies at home that had run out. Some of them were there because there had been time before the cascade to add 3 weeks of buffer to their supply, and they hadn't gotten around to it. I came back for that room, for the people who didn't have to be in those chairs. You may be one of them. That is what I believe. That is why I am here saying this. If what I've shared today reached you, if any part of it landed in a way that felt true, I would ask you to subscribe to this channel, not for me and not for numbers, because there are more testimonies like mine, more people who came back carrying something specific, something verifiable, something that the world needs to hear while there is still time to act on it. And I believe you are someone who needs to hear them. In the comments, I want to ask you one thing. What medication do you take every day that you have never once thought about stockpiling? Write it. Just name it. Because sometimes the act of naming something is the first step toward doing something about it, and I believe the people watching this deserve a space to do that together. I was a pharmacist from Findlay, Ohio, who died on a Tuesday and came back. I did not ask for what I was shown. I am not sure I was the most obvious candidate, but I was shown those 3 categories, and I was shown that waiting room, and I was given to understand that I was being sent back specifically because a pharmacist was the person who would be believed by the people who needed to act. I am saying it now. I have done what I was sent to do, whatever is coming, and something is coming, and the shelves will tell you when it arrives. I hope this reaches you before it does.